Good evening, everybody. My name is Neil Redfern. I'm the Executive Director of the Council for British Archaeology. And I'm absolutely delighted that you're joining us tonight for an evening with the National Trust Archaeologists. This is the fourth year now that we've been hosting the amazing National Trust Archaeologists and hearing about their work. A little bit of a change this year. We've moved the date. We have, in previous years, hosted the National Trust Archaeologists during our Festival of Archaeology in July. But they're such busy people doing loads of events for us that we actually decided to move it now to March to give them a little bit more time to actually do some active archaeology during the CBA's Festival of Archaeology in July. So we're here on our fourth annual conversation with the National Trust Archaeologists. I'm going to be handing over to them shortly, but first of all, we would just like to ask people to ensure they abide by the CBA's Code of Conduct. A link has been put in the chat. So again, it's just about respecting those people who are talking and presenting, and to keep any questions about the archaeology that you're going to hear about. Please do keep adding into the chat where you're calling in from tonight, and any comments you want to put in there. If you've got a question, we would ask you to use the Q&A function that you'll also find on your Zoom screens. That way the presenters will be able to see your questions, and Shannon, when she's actually hosting, will be able to ask those of the actual panel when we come into the question section. There will be 3 20-minute talks for you with half an hour for questions at the end. So questions into the Q&A and we'll get those added into there. What I would like to do now is to introduce Shannon Hogen, who is the National Archaeologist at the National Trust. And Shannon has been responsible for helping us coordinate all of these events. And she's actually going to be your host tonight. So this is really us handing over to the National Trust. And I'm going to disappear and literally switch off my microphone and my video. I will be back at the end for the Q&A session. But for now, this is an evening with the National Trust Archaeologists. So Shannon, good evening, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you so much for the introduction, and good evening, everybody. Welcome from the National Trust side of things. As Neil says, my name is Shannon Hogen. My role in the National Trust is something called the National Archaeologist, which sounds a lot grander than it probably is. Really, what I do is I support all of our wonderful archaeologists out in the regions to deliver some of the work, the incredible work that they're doing. My background is in field archaeology. I live in the east of England. This is where I've spent my life. Formerly sort of a Fenland archaeologist is what I'd call myself. I saw a few people from Suffolk popping up in the chat, so you'll know what I mean. Yeah, so at the National Trust, for those of you who don't know, we have what I would refer to as a smattering of archaeologists across our England, Wales and Northern Ireland, across our regions and countries. If you can think of a better collective noun for archaeologists, very welcome to hear your ideas in the chat. But here I would say we have a smattering of archaeologists. And their primary role, I suppose, in the National Trust is to unlock and understand and preserve the archaeological stories of all the places that we look after. So the role is very, very diverse. So one day the teams could be out supporting some of the tree planting schemes that we do in the National Trust. So tree planting impacts over hundreds of hectares of places, perhaps unsurveyed places where we don't know where the potential for archaeology is. The next day they could be looking at a toilet block and the impacts on any potential buried remains there. But that is, I think, the wonderful thing about being an archaeologist really is that you are always challenged and you are always learning. So one day you could be deep in the Mesolithic, the next day you could be discussing the design landscapes of Capability Brown, and of course, absolutely everything in between. So tonight we have 3 of our archaeologists presenting, 3 really, really interesting talks. We've got James Brown, who's in our London and southeast region, and he's going to be talking about some of the highlights from an incredible excavation they did at Ankerwycke. Then we're going to move to the Midlands with Viviana, and she's going to be telling us about more recent lost landscapes at Attingham Park. And lastly, we're going to move to Martin Papworth down in the southwest. Martin is one of our longest standing archaeologists, and he's going to give us his story of his career-long search for Stourton Castle. As Neil said, any questions, we're going to save them all to the end, but please, please, please do put them in the Q&A box and then we can field them. There will be a short poll at the end, just sort of getting a sense of what people enjoyed. It's just 3 quick questions. So I would encourage anybody to stay and please answer that at the very end. So without further ado, you don't want to hear me talk. So without further ado, I hope you all have a drink, some snacks, whatever you need. Sit back and please enjoy. I'm going to introduce James Brown to do the first presentation. Thank you, James.
Good evening, everyone. Right, just while we bear with us, we'll do our screen share, and so if that's going to work. Right, there we go. We have had some practice, so fingers crossed. All right, hopefully everyone now can see presentation on the screen.
Looks good, James.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, good evening. Thank you very much for signing in to listen to us speak for a bit. This is a great opportunity to share some of the work we've been doing. And as Neil says, we get quite busy during Festival of Archaeology, and actually the project I'm going to talk about has had us seeing 2 years of excavation, and actually all that excavation has been undertaken during the Festival of Archaeology in 2022 and 2023. So an opportunity to share some of the highlights of that work with you now. It's brilliant just to remind myself back to sunnier days. Actually, today's not been too bad, actually, has it? So yes, normally like to introduce my talks by saying I'm James Brown. If you can come up with any original jokes about my name, I'll be very impressed. Please feel free to put them in the chat. They've always been a good icebreaker throughout various kind of getting through university and various kind of talks, a bit of an icebreaker. And I'm going to be talking to you today about a project that we've been running at a site called Ankerwycke. And this is part of a National Lottery Heritage funded project called Runnymede Explored. And the idea of the Runnymede Explored project was to connect the National Trust sites of Runnymede and Ankerwycke, which are separated by the River Thames. And I'm going to do the next slide with the, oh, this bit where it's not, okay. So I always like to start with a location map of where we're talking about. So in the bottom corner of the little screen here, this is the M25. To the right of the M25 off the picture is Staines, and we're looking at the sites of Runnymede in Surrey and Ankerwycke in Berkshire on the River Thames here. Majority of you might know Runnymede, or hopefully know Runnymede. There is a significant event that has allegedly happened at Runnymede. There will be a reference to that in the talk, but we're going to focus most of our talk on around the site of Ankerwycke, which is a rather different feel. And I've made a comment about the M25. If you are driving to Ankerwycke on the M25, this is the junction you are looking for, just in case someone likes to do that by visual mapping. And yes, you might have noticed I've got a bit of a sort of a tree behind me as well. So just rather than my washing in my in the kind of bedroom I'm giving this talk now, and that's one of the reasons that most people might have heard of the name Ankerwycke. It's rather famous for the Ankerwycke yew. Reputed to be over 2,500 years old, and it's on the National Trust likes to have a good story on a website. Allegedly, another one of those sites where Henry VIII wooed Anne Boleyn. I'm sure that there's thousands of those across the country. That unfortunately is not true, but I've been trying to get them to take it off the National Trust website, but it still remains there. So Ankerwycke yew, really impressive tree, and actually a lot of the talking I'm going to do about the history of the Ankerwycke site has almost been witnessed by the tree. So it's one of those emotive bits that we could actually get the tree to tell us what it's witnessed or seen. Our jobs will be a lot easier, but actually not as maybe not as fun or as interesting as some of the pictures I'm going to show you now. So our initial history at Ankerwycke starts really around the breaking down that kind of name clues. And it suggests the suggestion here is actually an anchorite. So that's a religious hermit is living on the site of a little island, and that's where our history for that, well, kind of our recorded history, our known history for Ankerwycke starts. And then kind of across the river, you've got Runnymede, which kind of suggests a place of assembly or council on an island as well. And actually that kind of links quite nicely to our kind of then our history of Magna Carta coming through as well. So I do have, I think there's a picture of the trunk of the Ankerwycke yew today. So our story for Ankerwycke begins with the founding, in terms of the archaeology that we recorded, begins with the founding of the nunnery in 1160. And one of the reasons we think believe the nunnery is founded here is actually due to that kind of relationship with the anchorite on site. There is references to the anchorite through the name, and then we've actually got references in some of our documents to spontaneous gathering of women at the site. And it's almost at that point where that potentially becomes a bit unruly. So the males decide they're going to actually found a nunnery and keep everyone under control. And that's a story that we get through most of our historical glimpses into Ankerwycke. It's written by the male pen, and it's bishops complaining about how they've had to visit Ankerwycke and dispense justice or solve out the naughty, solve the issues of the naughty nuns. It really reads a bit like a soap opera. This is our first visual representation of the church, Ankerwycke. This is a seal from 1192, and this tells us at that point that the nunnery is under the kind of Diocese of Lincoln. And it suggests that we're looking at a kind of timber church with a thatch roof, rather different to what we see in its later history. But this is our starting point. So this is a seal 1192. 1197, we get one of our first records of one of the nuns running away from Ankerwycke Nunnery, and her complaint is that she's been forced into the nunnery by her family to stop her getting hold of any of the inheritance that she's due. So the Pope gets involved and excommunicates her, and that's where our sort of our history of the nunnery really picks up, with these sort of stories of what the nuns have been up to. That's about. We can't really go through the talk without having a reference to Magna Carta. Handy map here says exactly where Magna Carta was signed, but we haven't been able to locate the position yet. There's various stories about Magna Carta Island, but that was a good tourist trap to people selling tickets across Magna Carta Island to visit the signing point. What is a big gap in our knowledge is actually, though we have some written records for the nunnery through that kind of the archives at Lincoln, there is no reference at all to Magna Carta. There's a real black spot in our history, a link to Magna Carta. So we are just going to gloss over it now. It could be a whole talk in itself, but to give you an idea of how that might have looked, here's some photos from one of the historical pageants that was run at Runnymede in 1935. And we'll kind of jump straight back across to Ankerwycke. So we have historical links to references to Ankerwycke, but what we don't have is any maps or real information about the site. The first real map that we get is this enclosure map from 1800. We've got the River Thames. Oh, sorry, I moved my mouse around. The River Thames coming through, and there's a suggestion here of the building here. And what we're looking at is potentially the latter stages of a Tudor house. We know that the nunnery was dissolved, and then a bit of a short period of nothing really happening at the site, it moving between different landowners until 1550. So Thomas Smith acquires the land and builds a Tudor mansion. Very quickly after building, he actually moves out in favour of a house on the Runnymede side, and this becomes a bit of a rental property. And for those who've lived in rental properties, you might do a lick of paint, freshen things up a bit, but you're probably not doing major changes. So actually, there's very little change, we think, in the actual Tudor house up until the Georgian period, where a new owner buys the house and decides that it's too dark and dingy, demolishes the whole thing and builds a Georgian manor slightly further away, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So we do have some potential pictorial representations from around the 70s. This is about 1803, a Lipscomb illustration, again, that fits this idea of a kind of almost a H-shaped plan building. But what we don't actually have is we didn't have until recently any of the archaeology to kind of prove or disprove this visualization. As I said, the Georgian period, we've got the River Thames coming through here. Our site of Ankerwycke would have been down here, the kind of the Tudor house. That gets demolished, and they build a Georgian manor up, and then convert the site of the medieval nunnery and the Tudor mansion into pleasure grounds. And we did have Turner visiting and doing some sketches in 1811 of the romantic ruins of Ankerwycke. And there's some kind of illustrations from Sales Particulars in 1870. I'll skip over those. And most visitors to the site today, their first glimpse is actually walking down this lovely avenue of black poplar trees. These are not poplar, they are part of the Georgian landscaping, but they are all modern replacements due to various storm damage. And just to quickly show that kind of modern Georgian mansion. This is a view from Britain from above, and but if you go there today, then you can't see any of this at all, because there's a series of fires in around 1960s when after the Ankerwycke House had become a bit of a nightclub, the Santa Monica nightclub. A few fires in 1960s, and then in 1993, or around 1993, the site was demolished, and in 1998, the site came to the National Trust, and tenant farmers came back onto the land. And actually, since that kind of buying by the National Trust for £1 in 1998, very little has happened on the site, but it's a well-loved site for local residents and people going for the tree, but not actually really understanding the landscape that tree sits in. Lovely, tranquil site. If you do get the opportunity to visit, I really encourage it. There's a tiny car park, and I say a lovely, tranquil site, apart from it being under the Heathrow flight path. So when you're trying to record videos or podcasts or do little bits for social media during Festival of Archaeology, it can be quite hectic with some of the huge planes flying over, but if you can ignore those, it is a spectacular site. And that's a photo of the manor before it's demolished. So Ankerwycke today, you've seen the pictures of the Ankerwycke yew tree. This is what is surviving of that kind of link into that medieval and Tudor history on the site. This is the only bit of building, upstanding building material you can find on the site, tightly fenced in, and really doesn't link into the wider site. And there's also, when we started the project, a bit of concern, or not concern, but unsure whether this was actually a romantic folly put up from material left lying around from the demolition of the site, or was it we are actually looking at some of the surviving medieval elements of the priory that was later converted into the Tudor mansion. There is a few things going on in this building that does give us, I think, a hint that this is more. This actually is more substantial and an in situ rather than it being a romantic folly. The bit where I'm using my laser pointer at the moment is a little lip to show that would have been a second floor. And actually, what was also slightly confusing here is we're actually looking at what would have been an inside facing wall. So though it's an L-shaped structure, it feels like a sort of like a barn left on the site, just sort of falling down. We're actually looking at the inside, so this would be an internal wall facing off this side, and then if you're standing on the other side, you've been looking at an external face. But this is the site today. So we have a large amount of historical references. I made a kind of a comment around some of the stories of the nuns getting into trouble and the male bishops coming down. We have a story from about 1415 where a bishop from Lincoln has to visit, and there is complaints from the nuns that the abbess has blocked up some of the windows in the dormitory. The response to that from the abbess is that she's had to do that because the female men are too busy talking to the males walking up and down the River Thames side. So again, one of those bits of gossip that we get. And we have from the disillusion a kind of idea of what buildings they had there, but apart from that, very little knowledge. There is this earthwork survey from 1992, and there is our upstanding remains are here. There's this large platform to the south, and there's activity to the north as well. So potentially we are looking at surviving material linked to the nunnery. Are we looking at a potential cloister to the south of the existing structure or to the north? And that's something that we've really kind of sort of debated backwards and forwards. So as part of this HLF National Lottery Heritage Fund project, we decided to see if we could actually try and answer some of those questions. The first bit of work we did sort of curtailed a bit by, I won't mention the C word, but with volunteers after the pandemic, when we could get out, was doing a whole program of geophysics to try and understand the site a bit more. One of the things that we were really interested in was this cross shape appearing on the platform to the south of the upstanding remains, which we initially interpreted as a Tudor garden. But the question was did that Tudor garden lay over the top of the medieval cloister? Or was the medieval cloister actually being represented by some of these right angles at the top here? So the geophysics definitely suggested there was a lot going on buried under the ground that we couldn't see, but we didn't really understand it. So we applied this as a scheduled monument. So we applied to Historic England to undertake a kind of a series of small targeted excavations to try and unpick the story of the site. This is why the geophysics, I just want to show this because this site here is actually an outdoor swimming pool. So this is a swimming pool beside the River Thames that was being operated by the Santa Monica nightclub post 1940. I think there's actually then this resistivity shows a bit clearer. So one of my jokes with the I better be careful, this is being recorded, but one of the jokes with the National Trust was that we could actually reopen the swimming pool and they'd be selling tickets for people to come and swim beside the River Thames on the site of Ankerwycke. That didn't quite happen, but never know, still could happen. So our key research questions for the dig was, could we find evidence of the cloister either to the south or the north of the upstanding remains? Could we answer whether the upstanding remains was actually in situ material and part of the original structure? And also an opportunity during Festival of Archaeology to engage local residents, visitors, volunteers in undertake and actually get hands-on with archaeology. So that was our, and also ground truth, some of the ground truth, some of the geophysics, but also see if we could actually identify whether any of the medieval footprints survived that hadn't been destroyed by the later Tudor activity. So we worked with Surrey County Archaeology Unit to help us deliver the practical archaeology on the ground, and we ended up doing, over 2 years, doing 4 trenches. Trench 1 was the north of the upstanding remains, and Trench 2 in the Tudor Garden area in 2022, and then Trench 3 right up against the remains, and Trench 4 against this building platform were undertaken this year. So trenches, we'll have a quick talk for trenches, so my time's ticking away. So this is, I'm going to start with Trench 2 first. There'll be a reason why we're not going to go in order, you'll see in a minute. So this was Trench 2, and this was put over our believed to be Tudor garden feature, but we were kind of wanted to find out if there was a medieval cloister lying underneath it. When we started excavating down, we found a lot of orange river gravel, and then underneath that river gravel, we did start finding a lot of chalk. We also found here a Tudor retaining wall. But what we showed here was, though we had a medieval floor surface lying beneath this, there was no features. And actually, this is all infill material. So during the Tudor phase, when they built their garden in front of the house, they've kind of thrown in a whole load of the demolished chalk from the wider priory buildings, poured in a whole load of orange river gravel, and then built their garden on top, raising the kind of level so that if you're walking around in your Tudor finery around your lovely garden, you don't want to be getting wet feet from it constantly flooding. And we had this lovely Tudor garden wall retained here. So there's a bit of a closer look at the garden wall. Sorry, next slide's gone on. Trench 1. So this is one done in 2022. If you imagine the L-shaped building remains over to our left over here, the Ankerwycke U is down in this area here. And this was put over the right angle we showed on the geophysics. The reason I didn't show this one first is when we first started scraping this, we found a whole lot of orange gravel. And that classic bit where you have about a 2-week excavation about to start, and you open the trench and you have a bit of a panic that you've already come down onto a bit of natural river gravel. Luckily, from our Trench 2, we realised that was part of the Tudor landscaping. And as a result of that Tudor landscaping, it has meant that we've actually preserved some of the medieval materials actually beneath the Tudor phase. And what you're looking at here is our kind of our medieval cloister wall here, a cloister garth. So this would be the inside square bit of the cloister. This is our low wall here, and this is our cloistral walkway through here. So the nuns have been walking around here, getting between the different buildings, and we had this huge chalk wall here, which we didn't manage to fully investigate, but our understanding is actually this is the church. So the church is this area here, north of the cloister, and actually the east end of the church faces towards the Ankerwycke U. And if we potentially were to go back with permission of Historic England, the church area here is potentially where we might find the earlier evidence of an anchorite cell underneath the church here as well. There is a bit of an issue with this photo. That is one of our volunteers dressed up as a monk. So there wouldn't have been many monks wandering around the site, but he's standing there in the cloistral walkway. He just happened to have a monk's outfit and dedication to the cause. Cut his hair to make it look like a character that might have been seen in medieval period, and was well loved by our visitors on the guided walks. One of the bits of interest for us here was that actually this almost like low pentis wall. So we're not looking at like a Laycock Abbey where there's huge, lovely kind of arched stone. The low wall here would have supported a wooden lean-to, and actually the structure here has been built by stacking tile and then rendering it to make it look like chalk. So making use of existing materials and doing a bit of triggering. Oh, my time is moving on. Right, I need to pick up pace a bit. Trench 3 was against the remains, and this is at this point that we realised that we actually were looking at some of the medieval remains of the nunnery that had then been converted into Tudor mansion. So there's some volunteers working on it, a lot of scaffolding, because at the same time we're doing some consolidation work on the remains, which I'll show you some photos in a minute. But just want to show you these photos. On the top area here, we're looking at like a lot of 1940s consolidation work where a huge amount of cementous material has been brought in. But where we actually excavated, we found this lovely medieval stonework here. And rather surprisingly, we also found a Tudor steps down into a basement. And when they did the Tudor basement, they realised the foundation of the chalk medieval buildings was not sufficient enough, so they actually had to do some a bit of Tudor underpinning with bricks down here at number 7. There is a lot going on here. I'm not going to be able to talk in detail, but one of the things we'll be sharing afterwards is I can share the link to the report where you can go and peruse this more at your leisure. What was one of our star finds was actually this number 4 here. We're looking at a medieval threshold. So this is the nuns who have been walking across this stone into this building here. So we get a whole idea of actually how wide this building was, and we're looking at the medieval refectory. So this is where the nuns would have been eating their meals and storing the kind of the food and stuff for the nunnery. And there's in the more traditional 2D plan. That's what you're looking at there. I'm really running out of time, so I will just very quickly say that our trench 4 on the south end of the garden area. This was to try and look at the kind of landscaping here, and what we found here was actually, it told us there wasn't any really amazing kind of features to be found, but it told us a changing landscape story, because on our site here we had a whole load of almost medieval deposition on the outside of what became the Tudor garden, showing us that when the medieval nuns were kind of focused around that inward facing cloister, the lay sisters or nuns were coming out here and discarding their rubbish towards the River Thames. There was hardly any Tudor finds from out here until a bit later landscaping, which suggests that actually when that Tudor period was happening, the whole focus changed, being seen from the River Thames, that led to this being the Tudors not dumping the material here. They're probably dumping that somewhere else on site. We didn't find that. So there's a really nice story. Though there's no amazing amazing features, there's a changing story of how this land has been used. Though I'd say there was not amazing so I'm just going through that quickly. We did have this cut silver long cross from Henry III, dating about 1248. And what was really nice about this, though it's in 2 pieces there, when we actually found it, it was deliberately folded. And I'll kind of work with the Portable Antiquities scheme and show that that's a sign of devotion seen on other religious sites. So someone has been coming to the site around that time with a half silver coin, folded it over in a sign of devotion, and left it, kind of accidentally dropped it or deposited it on the ground. And a few other. We did find some decorated floor tiles, only 2, unfortunately, over 2 years. So one of the buildings did have some medieval decorated floor tiles, but believe that most of the nunnery was flagstones, which were then later salvaged for wider use. And a lovely bead here, potentially part of a rosary. I'm going to skip over some more of the finds, just because I really want to end on this kind of thing. So the site, so you've got the Ankerwycke U and the bit of the L-shaped remains, but not really much else across that kind of wide landscape. So as part of our work, we put together a whole series of interpretation, and one of the things we worked with Phil Kenning to work up these 2 reconstructed illustrations based on the geophysics and the archaeology. And the bit that you have seen in the photos, the upstanding remains, is we're looking at this L-shape here, just there. You see my mouse moving around. So you have the the medieval refectory, the medieval church, and then into our Tudor period. Oh, that's a nice little circle show. We are into the Tudor period. That changes into that kind of that garden design with the water canal, and this is where our trench was, or that trench 4 that I talked about very briefly at the end. So you can see the whole kind of focus changes from an inward facing medieval activity to this outward facing Tudor approach. And one of the final things you've seen at the beginning is, as part of the Heritage Lottery funded work on the site, we worked with Cliveden Conservation and Historic England to look at actually consolidating and conserving the remains. They've been looking a bit rather unloved. So this was a great opportunity to do a lot of the lime repointing, stabilize, remove some of the cementous hard capping, apply this lovely soft capping, and actually remove the fencing as well. So actually the structural remains now feel that they're actually part of the whole site rather than a small kind of forgotten about piece of the story of the site. And this provides the great footsteps into telling the story of the site to our visitors. And actually most of our local residents who visited during the dig said they've been walking around this site for years and years but had no idea actually about the huge extent of history that's been going on here. And I will now be stopping talking. Obviously that's a really quick run through of 2 years. If you managed to catch Digging for Britain this year, you would have seen potentially a bit more information about the site of Ankerwycke. And as part of our work as well, we are producing lots of reports. So if you have the opportunity to search out our National Trust Heritage Records online, you'll be able to find out a bit more information. Apologies for the kind of gallop through, but I will now stop talking and hand over to someone else.
Thank you, James. That was incredible. It just goes to show that there's so much information comes out from even small scale excavations, and archaeologists are charged with like piecing together these incredible stories out of the information that they get. So yeah, really, really amazing whistle stop tour. But the 3D model that James alluded to, the photograph that had all the numbered points on it, I definitely encourage you. That's Sketchfab, James, I think. Sorry, you just muted yourself at that point. Yeah.
I'd mute myself and a drink quickly, so I hadn't. But yes, they're on Sketchfab. We're going to be sharing the links to those at the
Brilliant.
end. Well.
So I would encourage anyone to have a look at that, because you can move that image around and you can query those numbers, which is terrific. So we're going to move on to Viviana, who is up in the Midlands. She's going to be talking about, we often think about archaeology and we think about sort of our ancient past, but actually, and a lot of the places that we look after with a lot of the grand houses, we have completely lost recent history because they change so rapidly. The owners of these houses change their landscape and their environment so quickly, depending on trends and money and who owns the house. And actually, a lot of detail over the last few hundred years can be completely lost. So Viviana is going to talk to us about some of the work they've been doing at Attingham Park and some of the more recent lost landscapes of Attingham that they've been working on in the last few years. So I will hand over to Viviana. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. You need to excuse me. I'll need to stop my video because my broadband can be a bit dodgy, so I don't want to lose you midway.
No problem.
Let's share my screen. Right. I hope everybody can see the screen.
Yep, got it.
Brilliant. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to talk about the research project run at Attingham Park between 2018 and 2023, which led to the discovery of a forgotten Regency pleasure garden. For the next 20 minutes, I will entertain you by presenting a project that has become a fine example of collaboration between the National Trust property and consultancy teams, as well as volunteers. Since its offset in 2018, the project has been designed as one where archaeological gains were matched by public benefit, involving volunteers, local groups, and the wider public in discovering a lost aspect of Attingham history. And public engagement was definitely the driving force behind the delivery of the project. We've been supported by the National Trust Attingham Park, and we also had some external partners like the Robert King Foundation and the Shropshire Archaeology and Historical Society to fund the project. Attingham Park is located in Shrewsbury, to the south east of. It's located in Shropshire, to the southeast of Shrewsbury, and it represents one of the biggest and greatest country houses in the county. The first Ordnance Survey map to the right shows the location of the property to the northeast of Attingham village on the B4380 Shrewsbury to Wellington Road. And it also shows the location of the area subjected to our research, circled here in yellow, to the south of the walled garden. Attingham Park is a Grade 2-star registered park which covers an area of 200 acres and sits within a wider estate covering 3,800 acres. It was built in 1785 and it was in continuous ownership by 5 generations of the Berwick family until it was given to the National Trust in 1947. The property exemplifies the rise and decline of the great English country house estate from the late 18th century to the mid 20th century. The survival of these large estates and vast mansion provides an insight into the sheer scale, wealth, and importance of the great English country estates, how they were self-sufficient, how they provided employment and structure for great numbers of people, and how their successive owners both squandered and nurtured their inheritance, which is something that we could see reflected in the development and decline of the site excavated in recent years. What turned to be a successful research project started as a compliance piece of work. In 2018, the head ranger sought my advice in advance of the creation of a new access route to the west of the walled garden. Knowing that historic features could potentially be affected by the proposal, it was advised that evaluation work should take place to assess the level of survival and the impact that the work might have had on a 19th century track to the north and a medieval track to the south. Both sites were successfully located, with an additional surprise. As I was walking on site one day, and you can see that the area was heavily covered by vegetation because it's not an area open to the public, I spotted a little corner of a dressed sandstone, and I asked the archaeological contractor appointed to deliver the work just to open a little evaluation trench to inform me about the extent and the nature of such features. That, I must say, was a lesson learned, because never leave a free spirit archaeologist with a JCB. What turned, by the end of the day, the full footprint of a previously unknown building was revealed. We immediately looked at all existing available maps. The first mapping reference comes from Repton Red Book. Repton was commissioned to landscape the grounds in 1797 and 1798. And although the Red Book is generally very well detailed, it did not show the building. All the other available historic maps also did not provide any evidence of the existence of such building. Building was later fairly confidently identified as a summer house or a small lodge reconfigured as a summer house. The core of the building was a 5-meter square room with thick brick walls, which may have been of some height, externally clad in stone around at least 2 sides, possibly all 4. Low brick walls within the main room and one across the center of the space would have supported the beams of a suspended wooden ground floor. The doorway, located to the north, was framed by a pair of internal clasping buttresses, and there was fragmentary evidence observable below this lovely tree stump of a corner fireplace in the southwest corner. After the building of the main walls of the square room had commenced, one room wings about 4 meters square were added either side, but jointed against its corners at the back and connected by a portico or corridor across the front, just here to the north side. The character of these wings, I have to say, has always been unclear, but quite possibly before the wings have even been completed, their walls were demolished and the footings, except the north one, were thoroughly robbed of their brickwork. The front wall was retained as the base of a new structure, represented by a line of long, rectangular, fine sandstone. I apologize. blocks. These return around the east side of the building and may formerly have returned around the west side as well, although no evidence remained over there. They were interpreted as the footing for a lightweight timber wall or an open arcade, forming a portico or veranda around the building. The excavation also revealed a brick walled enclosure, which you can pick in the bottom left picture, just at the back of the building. It is at least 55 meters long, running east to west by 40 meters roughly north to south. This was further investigated throughout the 5 seasons of excavation, finally revealing a rectangular enclosure curving to its east. The interior, the former subfloor space, was fully excavated, producing a large quantity of demolition debris, including a very thin window glass from windows in the east and west side walls. The majority of these clear, but we had a small sample of painted glass as well. Pieces of Purbeck marble from a fireplace with its mantelpiece, thick wall ceiling plaster with lath impressions on reverse, pieces of sandstone, possibly local green siltstone, remaining from the cladding and possibly window jambs and sills. Architectural metalwork included masonry clamps, part of a possible iron window frame, an ornate keyhole cover, shutter fittings and door furniture. Slate was used to cover the roof, but it was also used in the walls for leveling up and waterproofing the bedding for stone cladding. 1,130 fragments of painted and stained glass was found during excavation, and it depicts floral and foliate border designs, including hawthorn, acorns, and rose, and they be dating to the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Large quantity of plain glass was also retrieved, providing evidence of on-site cutting and fitting. The glass likely came from the studio of John Betton of Shrewsbury, who undertook major glazing work at the mansion in the early 19th century. The glass analysis revealed that this came from recycled panes of plain glass, probably from the picture gallery roof within the mansion during the years 1806 and 1807, and this was designed by John Nash in 1805. The lead also dated from the 18th to early 19th centuries. Material evidence combined with archive research carried out by the National Trust volunteers and specialist analysis of glass and lead indicated that construction may well have taken place in the early 19th century for the second Lord Berwick, Thomas Noel Hill. In 1789, Noel, first Lord of Berwick, dies and his son Thomas inherits the estate. He travels from 1792 and 1796 to Europe and Italy. On his return from the Grand Tour, he commissions Humphrey Repton to landscape the grounds in front of the house, enhance the parkland, and incorporate new structures probably designed by John Nash. He spent extravagantly. In 1810, in a letter to his brother William, Thomas admitted to not having resolution to abstain from building and picture buying. This intensified in 1812, when at the age of 41, Thomas married Sophia de Boucher, a 17-year-old former courtesan. He continues his improvements at Attingham, and Sophia indulged herself with the newly acquired wealth. Thomas' brothers had to force his brother and his wife in the second decades of the 1800s to leave Attingham and move to Italy to live a cheapest and more simpler type of life because they were trying to save the estate from bankruptcy. And 2 sales actually took place in 1827 and 1829 to try to save the estate. As I mentioned before, the archive research carried out by the volunteers was vital in dating the site. Several visits to the local archive allowed to find some key documents. In August 1814, upholsterer Jonathan Perry from Shrewsbury billed Thomas II Lord Berwick for 2 pairs of muslin curtains for the summer house. And in December 1814, a bill from plumbers Eggleston and Burr for repairing the leads on the summer house, although no location was specified. Other archive references reveal the letter dated 1909, when the 8th Lord Berwick commissioned a pump house, which was never been built, but the drawings accompanying the proposal became a useful source to understand the architectural design of the summer house, as builders suggested to use the masonry from the summer house in the woods as far as possible, using the old cornice. The drawing accompanying the plan for the pump house was used by Dr. Nigel Baker to create a visual reconstruction of the different phases of development of a mysterious building. Incredibly, during the pandemic, I did mention initially that we didn't have any historical cartographic evidence of the existence of this building, but the ranger managed to find a second copy of the estate map of 1849, where you can clearly see the location of a mysterious building and part of the enclosure wall. But what is even more interesting, that it appears to be a small enclosure or possibly a derelict or abandoned building to its northern side. In 2021, a separate excavation a few meters to the northwest of the summer house found and sampled an ornamental oval brick wall pool measuring 5.51 meters east-west and just under 4 meters north-south, and it was fed by a clay-piped water supply to its north side. This was built of the same type of brick as the summer house and the surrounding enclosure wall. Therefore, it led us to believe that this was all part of the same episode of work. You can see in the picture to the right, in the southwest quadrant, the dark patches in its surface where pockets of topsoil remaining in small holes, and the topsoil was literally between 5 and 10 centimeters of depth, and they were interpreted as dried out mud surface punctured by multiple animal footprints, both of small animals like sheep and deer, and larger animals, possibly cattle. A similar phenomenon has been seen and excavated before in a silted up moat overflow channel at Lower Brockhampton in Herefordshire. The remain of an iron hoop sitting on the gravel deposit at the center of the feature was initially interpreted as the remain of a water bowl, but observation from the National Trust Gardens and Parkland consultant Simon Gulliver pointed out that it could represent the remains of a water lily container, maybe a reused half barrel, later used for farming purposes. In the late 18th century and early 19th century, small pools with a clear ornamental function for both fish and ornamental planting are pretty common, with examples at Croom, Blair, and Kew. As part of the community engagement program, a number of test pits were excavated with local groups. The program helped in identifying section of the enclosure wall to the east of the site and providing evidence of another lost feature showed on the estate map that I mentioned before to the north of the summer house. Test pit number 10 show remains of building debris, and that's really where we thought we would want to concentrate our attention the following year. In 2022, the foundation of another building was discovered. The size, the construction method, and the material used mirrored the one of the summer house, leading the team to believe they found a service building. However, in 2023, excavation revealed something completely different. The building was almost certainly a hothouse or a large greenhouse, around 5 meters wide and almost 16 meters long. It was equipped with a heated back wall and probably a single pitch glazed roof supported midway down the pitch by a row of iron columns seated in the stone blocks that you can see here in the center of the building, which may also have been used as trellis. There was evidence within of a flower bed retaining wall, just where a volunteer is digging over there. and a probable heating duct across the building supply hot air to the front wall. A lean-to extension that you can see to the right of the photograph along the north side of the building had a brick-floored kitchen-like space at its east end, and you can see here the remain of oven and an oblique fireplace as well. And it may have been provided service function for the site as a whole. The absence of floors, the presence of soil in the interior containing a huge amount of flower pot sherds, small fragments of plain glass, and the provision of heating in the thickness of the north wall, all pointing to the building having been a very large hothouse, glasshouse of greenhouse. Also, here aligned and leading to the south, you can see the remains of the water drain pipe leading to the oval pool, which is roughly located in this area. And although initially we thought there could have been a pump house or a well to feed into the oval pool, we later, based on the structural remains, made very, very clear that this pipe was collecting rainwater to lead into the pool. The gathered archaeological evidence combined with the archive research have provided crucial information which have allowed to bring back to life a site lost for almost 200 years. It created new narratives which allowed people, National Trust staff, volunteers and the wider public to discover lost stories associated with the Berwick family and their employees. It reminds us all that the past lies beneath our feet, sometimes in unexpected places. It reminds us of the value of the historic environment as a rich, fragile, and worth of protection resource. We are currently working with a successful illustrator to create a visual reconstruction of the site. Although this is not the final version, I'm taking the liberty to show you the work in progress, and I would like to welcome you all to visit Attingham to see the final product. Might be a little bit more challenging for our colleagues in America, but the offer is still open. So, when people ask me about the legacy of our project, I have to make sure that people are at the center of these wonderful 6 years by recognizing their dedication and commitment in working on this project, which allowed to engage with numerous groups of people and created a safe space to share experiences and skills. I showcase the commitment of the Attingham operation team to make everybody welcome. I applaud the ambition and challenge they took year by year to create more immersive experiences for public benefit and enhance the interpretation of the site. I showcase the commitment of Dr. Nigel Baker and all our volunteers in helping on site to make the intangible tangible, to share the knowledge, to educate, and to make sure that the past is preserved for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vivi. That was absolutely wonderful. And it's most of the projects that we do have a huge community component involved in it, but Attingham is one of the real highlights of some of the work that our archaeologists have done recently in terms of their community engagement. So it's a really incredible example. And I would say if there's one thing that archaeologists love doing, it's sharing what we do and trying to encourage people to be part of it. I will move on to Martin. There are a lot of questions about how to get involved with archaeology. I'm sort of answering some of those in the chat, but in the Q&A section, but I will come back to some of those as well. So finally, I would like to hand over to Martin. As I say, he has been in the Trust for a good number of years. I won't say how many, Martin. And this is a very personal journey, a personal quest to find something in very particular at Stourton. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Martin. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. I hope you'll enjoy this show.
Are you all right?
I'm just good, yeah.
No worries. You look at. Yeah, you
So-
look at sharing your screen. In the meantime, there was some wonderful, I'll just say this to keep the time ticking. There were some amazing suggestions for collective nouns for archaeologists, which I absolutely enjoyed. Some really, really sort of expected ones: a trowelful, a trowel, a treasure, an ark, a sleuth, a hoard, things like that. But I particularly like, and I think some of my colleagues will like this, a fertile of archaeologists, an assemblage, and of course a good old classic, a ritual of archaeologists.
Ooh.
So pick your favorite. Thank you, Martin. We can see that screen great.
Oh, good. Right, okay. So this is the quest. You see before you a picture of Stourton Castle. It's the only image we've got for it. It was done in 1674 by a man called John Aubrey, and it's been something I've been searching for a very, very long time. So I'm south of Viviana and west of James. I work in the southwest, and there's a whole lot. And the trust, as you've seen already, is very famous for having big houses and big gardens. It didn't start out like that. It was very much a countryside organisation to start with, but certainly since the 1940s, the trust has been given and acquired a lot of big places. And one of the most famous ones, I guess, is Stourton in Wiltshire, which is not far from me in Warminster, where I'm speaking to you from. And each of those places, this is the area I work in, each of those places has a history. So say down in Purbeck, down in the bottom here, you know, the castle there is a ruin on a hill. The whole point of it is on a hill, so it hasn't moved much. But other places have shifted. Sometimes they shift around whole estates. So you have different central places, different houses that develop over time. Sometimes it's hidden just next door to where the present house is. And bit by bit, I've sort of worked out over the last 38 years. I started at Corfe Castle in 1986. Over the years, I've sort of visited places and sort of tried to work out the origins of their big places. So here you got Killerton, for example. There was a story of a grand house. The Ackland family started down by the river in Column John. Then they moved to Killerton itself. But that's not a great house. They had a great idea to build this huge house. But Thomas Dyke Ackland fell out with the architect and just left it. And then the site of that old house was lost until we got the LiDAR. I'll show you some LiDAR later on. And the LiDAR showed underneath the trees immediately where it was. So they set up a mock doorway, and the volunteers went out there with the Southwest Archaeology, and sure enough, there was the foundations of the building. Great. So we ticked that one off. We know where that is now. Mystery solved. Kingston Lacey, where I went to after Corfe Castle, there was a story about what is Kingston Lacey. You know, why is it called Kingston, the King's Farm? You know, who was Lacey? You know, it's all medieval. But what you got there after Corfe Castle was demolished is a 17th century house. It's full of wonderful things, but where was the old house? And of course, as archaeologists, we really want to know, you know, we want to look before the obvious story. We want to see the stuff beneath the ground, the stuff that's hidden, and try to imagine what was there once. So we took the geophysics out there, surveyed in front of the north garden. A tree fell over in 1990, tore up bits of medieval stuff, took a resistivity meter out. See top left, you got a nice big rectangle, twice the size of Kingston Lacey House. That's the royal house. That was where John of Gaunt, Henry IV, Henry V came for Christmas. And of course, dig a hole, prove it. There it is. Wonderful. Right. But what of Stourton House? 1993, I was fresh from Kingston Lacey, sure that I could find it. It's a huge, great place. You see on the bottom right, old Stourton House. It's very much like Laycock Abbey, which lies north of here in North Wiltshire. There's an aerial photograph. You'd have an outer courtyard with the working buildings in, and then the inner courthouse where the courtyard where the main manor house is. It's a nunnery that's developed into a Tudor and an 18th century house, and then into the 19th century. It's a wonderful motley collection of architecture. Fabulous. So if you think of Stourton Castle and you've ever been to Laycock Abbey, that's what we're looking for, the same sort of place. And if you've ever been to Stourhead, it's a wonderful place. It's really, really famous for its great landscape garden. It's the source of the River Stour, so that's why it's called Stourhead. And Whitesheet Hill is a fabulous prehistoric site on the estate. Another hill fort up here on Park Hill Camp. This is what we're going to be looking at here. Stourhead. Where is Stourton Castle? Where is the place that preceded it? Stourhead was created by the Hall family, the new money. They came in the 18th century, developed this wonderful landscape garden, very, very fashionable. The Stourton family take their name from Stourton village, which is down here. And there's the village church there. And there are rumours that they were, they come out of a family that goes right back to Doomsday and into the Saxon period. And they've developed this huge, great house. So this is the new place. This is the place built in the 1720s, the place you'll come to see when you visit. But where was the old place? And really, for hundreds of years, people have looked for it. It was forgotten about by the early 19th century. Here's that picture again, and here is a reference. John Leyland describes it, says that John Stourton had the money from the French campaigns. He supported Henry V in the 15th century. His father, William, had already built some sort of manor house there. The original one is lost in time. So somewhere, it says it's on a mean hill. It says it's not far. So it's a lofty hall, a great kitchen, courtyards. And we had, in the early 18th century, a bit of a scanty documentary stuff, which talks about a north gateway to a dairy, a drove road, talks about Spencer's Mead up on the top right here, Slade Mead, Barn Mead on the bottom there. And this map, which is behind here, 1722, is just a few years after the place was demolished. So surely there would be clues in the landscape of where that old place was. This huge, great site. We even have an account of 1718 to 1721. And if you notice about a third line down, there's a bill for pulling down the old castle. Because the Stourton family had backed the wrong side in the Civil War. There'd been a murder in the Tudor period, and Charles Lord Stourton was hung for it. There's a lot of stories relating to it, but they actually backed all the wrong things, and they lost the money they had from the 15th century. And by the early 18th century, they had to sell up. And the banking family, the Hawes, came in and they pulled down the old Gothic place, which wasn't fashionable at all, and built their fancy classical place instead. Here's 1785. You can see, once again, Slade Mead, Spencer's Mead in the old documents. No sign of the old house. And here's a route up into the stable block. So the stable block is interesting. That's always there. There's the Stourhead house there. And it had a pretty fancy gateway going into it. So has the stable block got something to do with where the old house was? Well, Richard Colt Hall, famous Richard Colt Hall, who became the antiquarian, he wrote Ancient Wiltshire, which was a really, really important document for the foundation of archaeology in Wiltshire and internationally. He decided to shift the gateway to where you enter now. So this is the gateway that was in the stable block. And he reckoned that these Spanish chestnut trees, which run in a row up in this direction, they're much older than the Stourhead house. They go at least back to the 17th century. That these lines of Spanish chestnuts point the way to the site of Stourton Castle, somewhere between Stourhead House and the stable block. So I carpet bombed this whole area, north of the stable block and east of the Stourhead House, with geophysics, magnetometry and resistivity. And you can see 1993, 1995, right through to the early 2000s, we got nothing. It just didn't reveal a thing. We even dug a trench on the north side of the stable block, got down almost a meter, bits of brick, bits of stone, nothing really, nothing worked. So it can't be there. You're almost a meter down, surely. This isn't the site of Stourton Castle. So nothing really happened for a few years. There's a great team at Stourhead and a huge team of volunteers. There's a really great community of people. And Phil Nyman, the general manager, said, I want you to talk to us about archaeology. It was a lovely May day in 2022. And it was a bit hot actually, so we stood under this tree here. And he said, tell us about the archaeology on the Stourhead estate. So I told him about White Sheet Hill and the hill forts. And I said, Phil, I've got really unfinished business here. I just can't work out where Stourton Castle is. He said, Martin, he said, right, we need a theme for next year. So we're going to find Stourton Castle for you. We're going to give you the resources. And by July 2023, we'll have a Festival of Archaeology dig, and we'll give you some money for extra fancy geophysics, and you should be able to track it down. So, a summer of archaeology at Stourhead, culminating in the excavation to find Stourton Castle. And the whole of the house was taken over with it. I got my old boots out, and we put those out. We put piles of books and an old computer, all the bits and pieces, finds tray with a few bits in. I even did an interview which people heard me talk about the clues towards Stourton Castle. We talked about Richard Colt Hoare and his search for it back in the early 19th century, and his great book that he wrote there, We Speak from Facts, Not Theory. So this is a jeopardy, isn't it? I'm stuck not having found this place, haven't found any geophysics that sits there. It was getting a bit gloomy because I still wasn't tracking it down. I was talking to loads and loads of people. Everyone says they wanted to help dig the site. Well, where would I put my trenches? Also, the Treasures of the National Trust programme, BBC, were going to cover the whole thing. They're going to capture the moment that we found Stourton Castle. But I hadn't found it. And the geophysics up to June, we still didn't know where it was. So we got Tiger Geo, Anne and Martin Rosevear. They came out and did some survey. We did a LiDAR survey. This is wonderful. It shows you in great detail the earthworks here. Can you see off to the right? There's lots and lots of little strips. So therefore, that's medieval strip farming. So that part of it, that Spencer's Mead part of it, can't be where the castle is. And then you've got over to the left here, you can see that Stourhead house there. That's the stable block. So there is an area here which is stuffed full of earthworks, but none of them look quite like the footings of a building. You can see the trees running down through here on the approach road to the house. So LiDAR didn't really cut it. So then we did magnetometry, we said magnetic induction, and towards the end of the last day of the geophysics, Martin and Anne said to Treasures of the National Trust, they said, I think we might have found it for him. They said to me, Martin, we're going to find it, don't you worry, we'll find something. And they found this sort of high magnetic area down here where they see all the little red lines there. And they said, well, that's probably the closest you're going to get to it. There's been a lot of landscaping going on here. There's been a great avenue. They've done lots of stuff with the garden. There's an infilled valley, which is the blue bit. But we reckon that's it. So we did ground probing radar. And that didn't really show anything either, but it looked really good. It can go down to about 1 meter, but it's not very good beyond that. It showed some of the stuff in between. But anyway, we put a north to south on the line of that ground probing radar. We put 5 trenches in a north-south line. We put one there. There you are. A, B, C, D, E. There's a mound over here. We put a trench through there. And then we started. Set up the tents. Welcomed everyone coming to the house to the dig. And we dug down. Took the turf off. Beautiful, thick turf. Hadn't been touched for hundreds of years. And beneath it, we found bits and pieces. And that bit in the middle there, that's a ridge tile. That's older than the 18th century. So we're getting clues. And we got quite excited, but it was hard, it was dry, and we weren't really finding a great deal. So even so, this is the team and some of the volunteers pointing at a large stone, trying to imagine that we might have found it. Anyway, in the end, I said to the gardener, head countryside manager, Tim Parker, I said, can we have a JCB? And we're never going to do it. We're already 3 days in and we're not really cutting it. So we got a JCB and it went down almost 1 meter. And then this first weekend, we had Festival of Archaeology youth weekend, and it rained all day. And these children, they were so keen. And we said, well, you could do indoor activity if you like. No, they were going to dig. And this is the conditions they worked in. So you can see, there we are, almost a metre down, finding loads of stuff, still no walls. And then we started finding bigger stones. And we kept saying things like, well, 1 stone's a stone, 2 stones in a coincidence, but 3 stones are a wall. But actually, they weren't joined up, so they weren't. So then we found all this mortar underneath it. And then we found a wall, but it wasn't the right sort of wall. It was actually made up of reused bits of castles. So were we getting close to it? We think this wall was some of these landscape walls from the 1722 map here. So then we brought in we had, we were in the 9th day here. We had 12 days. We had 3 more days left, and we still hadn't hit solid walls. We called in the JCB again. The cameras were on it, and the digger grated on something solid. And there we are. And we cleaned it back, and there were walls. That was a great moment, because really, on day 9, we really thought we were going to not get this. So I was very confident then, so I thought, well, I'll do the old-fashioned thing that we learned in Weymouth College, and I'll get some ranging poles, and I'll test whether this stable yard actually is the line of it. If I can get 3 ranging poles in a line and put it out to this trench up here, and it clips the edge of the building, then I can say that the stable yard is actually still part of the castle we can see standing. So I did that, and there it is. There's the edge of the wall where the ranging pole is. There's a path, garden path on the outside of the building, and there is the castle. So we can say that actually the walls we were finding are aligned with the stable yard. And in that black soil there, we found this material, which is a typical early 18th century wine bottles, the sort of things the demolished people, the last people who occupied the site, drank before they knocked the place down. And the next one is over here. That last one there, and there we came across walls again. But look how deep they are. There's 1 metre 20 centimetres down, we hit a wall. And then off to the right here, we found this it's quite a narrow wall here, and there's other big blocks coming out. And as we went down into it, we started finding more and more. And we were very fortunate because we found all this material on top of those walls, which is typical early 18th century pottery, and also ridge tile, which is 16th, 17th century. So a big building, and that's how the roofs would have been decorated. And what that narrow wall was a fireplace with the parts of a window thrown into it, and the last occupants and the last fire that was lit in Stourton Castle. And notice here, notice this thing here. Someone walked past and said, a guy called Brian who works at Stourhead, who's the building surveyor there, and he said to me, "Oh, I've seen your bits. You found a bit of Newell staircase there, Martin." I said, "What's that then?" "That big lump of stone by the fireplace." And of course, that is an upside down step from a wall, from a staircase, a Newell staircase winding up into the tower. You can see on the drawing. So that's a wonderful thing to think. All those people who walked up that stair when the place was in use before it was knocked down. All those generations who occupied this place, and we found it. We found Stourton Castle, which was a great relief. And these blocks of stone, and there's so much still out there. But the latest thing is that they want to put a new sewage pipe in to link Stourhead to the mains, and the line of the trench goes right through this site. So we'll have to try and work things out, but we may find out more about it in the future. There's the Newell Stair again in all its glory. There's Stourton Castle, and perhaps it's this tower here that step came from. Yeah, so it's been wonderful working with all the people, all the visitors who came to see, and that kind of electricity you get from archaeology, isn't it? That real sense of discovery. And of course, anyone can discover things. It's all out there, isn't it? And it's great to have worked for the Trust for so long and had this opportunity to work with people to get them to discover and understand the deepest stories on their estates. So that's the end of that. So I'll stop sharing. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Martin. That was incredible. Somebody just put in the chat, there are some questions which I'll field, but somebody put in the chat, you know, that there is a lot of complex history at all of our places, and there's so many layers to things, and you could dig to a certain depth, and you're still just in the last sort of 150 years of demolition and rubbish and all sorts of other landscaping, and actually you just go that bit deeper and you get so much more. But yeah, he's sort of praising you, Stuart. He's praising you and your determination for finding it. It's definitely been that one in particular, Martin, has definitely been a real personal quest for you, trying to locate something. But we're full of that across the National Trust, tantalizing bits of evidence that don't make up a complete story, that we have to sort of learn about and discover in the most sensitive ways to the archaeology. So a lot of questions that people have been putting in, and I'll just field this one first. A lot of questions is around how you can get involved in archaeology in the Trust. And that's a really difficult one for us, because the main purpose of archaeology in the Trust is actually to preserve for future generations, as we would with you know, all of our nature conservation ambitions. And archaeology as a process, as you all know, is a destructive process. By digging something out, you automatically lose it. To dig to the surface of something and try and get as much understanding as possible is something that we can do, but it has to be quite carefully planned, targeted research. And one of the questions was about sort of competing ambitions at properties and competing sort of targets, I suppose, for our properties. So the gardens teams, the ecology teams, the ranger teams, people working outdoors, we are all trying to work to an end goal, which is preserving, conserving nature, environment, heritage, history. And they do conflict at some points, as Martin said about one of the you know, water pipes that they want to put across, which is going to affect the remains that he's finally discovered at Stourhead. And we have to work very, very carefully and very holistically in the National Trust. We can't just deal with archaeology in the same way that development-led archaeology would work. We have to be very sensitive about where we excavate, why we excavate, and how we record things. But in theory, the work that we do in the mitigation side of things, so when we have to have development, you imagine a lot of our places have drainage that's really not fit for purpose now, because it's quite archaic. We do have to upgrade that for the basic running of our places. We do have to have a visitor infrastructure so that people who come to our places can have tea and coffee and cafes. There is a basic need for mitigation, but we try to go above and beyond standard development sort of mitigation, and we try to record as much as possible, because every part of the history, every part of that story that we uncover is important to how we understand our places. I'm going to go to the questions. It's 8:20, but I'm going to go to some of the very specific questions that we had for some of the panelists, and then I will come back to some. There's a few younger people asking about sort of opportunities to get involved with the National Trust, which I'll address. There was one right at the top, James, for you. Was there anything you discovered at Ankerwycke that really surprised you or was unexpected? I mean, there's always stuff that is surprising and unexpected, I'm guessing, but to do with the layout and finds associated with the nunnery in particular.
I think the highlight for me was that kind of threshold stone. We're talking about a very evocative site with the Ankerwycke yew, the kind of chalk remains, and actually find that in situ, giving us an idea of dimensions of the building and that kind of the wear of the nuns walking over it. I think alongside that, I'd add in was a term that I learned was about aglets, which are the lace ends, and our volunteers were finding those by the bucketful more than the metal detectorists were finding. Just shows again that kind of dedication of volunteers to be finding a small piece of rolled copper alloy in a bottom of a trench kind of thing. And those were those really nice tangible links to the nuns dressing and how they're living their life at the site. So there wasn't, let's say, the sensational finds, but I think there's those finds start building up a story, which we can then share with our visitors. And I think that's always the great thing about archaeology, is that storytelling from those tiny finds to the more kind of in your face kind of chalk walls.
Yeah, absolutely. And different things appeal to different people. So when you have a range of everyday objects, it's not the gold and the glamour that really inspires a lot of people. It's the everyday, isn't it? It's the things that people can identify with. Brilliant. There's a bunch of questions for Vivi. So a couple of questions, Vivi, around are there any plans at Attingham to restore the lost pleasure grounds? And obviously you can imagine at all of our places, we can't restore all of those elements of the last couple of 100 years of some of the grand houses. But what are the plans at Attingham? Do you happen to know?
I think the ambition of restoring it's pretty impossible, because the structural remains are not that well preserved and not enough to talk about restoration work. As I mentioned initially, the site is not usually being open to the public, so it's always been a kind of forgotten area of the gardens. There are now plans to change the management of the area, open it to the public. But we know where the archaeology finally is. It's been fully recorded. It'll be there for the future, but for now we don't have really plans to do anything else with it, apart from enhancing the interpretation and make people aware that the potential of the site.
Yeah. And then another question, which I'll send to Vivi first, but Martin and James might want to come in as well. It's around whether the involvement of local community and volunteers, how that affected the approach that you took to how you excavated your excavation plans and your research plans, I suppose. And I'm sure the other two probably have opinions on this as well, because we do try to ensure that community is involved in any of the work that we do, because that's who we're doing it for. It's not for us, it's not for our properties specifically, it's for everybody, and to share that learning. So did it affect the way that you designed the excavation and the research?
Well, it did affect in certain years when maybe we were targeting smaller areas, so we didn't have enough space for a lot of people to work on. So you need to kind of plan a little bit better, and that's actually was the year in 2021 when we decided to do test pits, so we could give the opportunities to more groups and more people to be able to input into the work. But in the other years where we were lucky enough to work on a larger site and we could accommodate more people and being involved. But yes, definitely, it's been a learning curve personally for Attingham Park, because we never done a project this long, such a long research project. And also you want to make sure every year you offer something different, something that can either create new skills or create new engaging experiences. So there was definitely a lot of planning, a lot of collaboration with the property team.
Yeah, brilliant. I've seen two other questions which I can direct directly to Martin and James, actually. So Martin, one directly for you. How are you going to be sharing the story of the castle at the property? So how are you going to share that kind of, years of research, years of looking for something, and that amazing discovery that you had just recently?
Well, I suppose one of the things we did at the time was we blogged it every day. I mean, I think everybody does that, and actually doing it while you're doing it enables you to that whole sense of, oh dear, are we going to find it? So it's always, if you go to Archaeology National Trust Southwest, the story of the discovery is there, and that whole sense of unexpected. What I really want to do, and I met with the Stourhead team this week. We've got a conservation management plan for the house, and I think what you want to do is look at that site and see it through the eyes we have now. And I was really envious of Vivi's and James's reconstruction drawings. You want somehow, and we had that thing this morning, didn't we, when we had a virtual, that sort of digital interpretation, that kind of thing. It's I think that would be great to be able for everyone to go there and see it, and understand it's there. This is the old place, and then what you're looking at is the later thing. There's much still to do though. There's lots still to do.
Oh, there's lots still to do everywhere. There is a quick, I'll come to you, James, for a LiDAR question, but just there was a quick question about the material for Stourton Castle, and Martin, I hope you don't mind me sort of answering this, but we have a lot of cases where previous buildings that have been lost, material gets used very quickly. If you have a building that's abandoned or run down, it saves you quarrying stone, it saves you buying stone. People can just, certainly that happens in the east of England where stone is very rare. So someone was asking about the stone being, the demolished building and the material being reused, and I'm guessing that a lot of it was just transported out as soon as it was available.
Some of it was used in the bits you can't see in the house. You'd hide it into the corner of the house, you often get that.
Yeah, exactly. James, Sarah has asked about LiDAR. It is fascinating. You're right, Sarah, it is fascinating. What is it like working with it? Well, I think, James, you can sort of talk to that a little bit. It's been revolutionary for archaeology, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely amazing kind of thing. That ability on kind of large scales to look at landscapes, understand potentially large earthwork features that cross different land holdings, and kind of almost prospection. But I think the other bit that's really kind of moved on the last couple of years is that being shared with our citizen scientists or archaeologists at home, and the ability for them to get involved in helping digitize archaeology. And then also going, archaeology, LiDAR is brilliant. It's been, so revolutionary for me doing my work, but it's also worth caveating that you don't use it in isolation. We're using it with all those traditional techniques you've heard about today. And also what's really nice is when we get the opportunity to go out with volunteers to actually go and check some of those sites we've mapped at our desks, or our volunteers have mapped in the field as well. So again, it's one of those things that's, yes, you can waste a lot of time looking into it, but it all helps us. And again, it's that bit that there's so many different ways of doing archaeology that everyone can get involved. If you don't want to be actively digging a hole, there's ways you can get into archaeology and engage and help part of that process of understanding our landscape and sharing that with a wider audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that someone I remember telling me about archaeology is archaeology will steal any kind of techniques or science that they possibly can to make their job easier. So LiDAR was it's used for lots of things, but it was an absolute godsend. There's a few specific questions around properties. I've just seen one about Chirk Castle. I'd recommend if you want to do volunteering at a specific property that you contact the property. If you go on the property webpage, you will find a generic contact email address for that property, and they can direct you to the right area. Neil, there is actually, I think we can probably joint answer this, because a lot of people have asked about getting involved in archaeology in the trust, or getting involved in archaeology because they're doing a degree in it, or they want to come back and do archaeology instead of what they're doing now. So looking at different pathways, this is always a big question. It's really tricky for the National Trust. I think, as I say, our aim is around preservation. So a lot of the work, so James's project, Heritage Lottery funded, very specific research questions. We have very, very limited time, limited resource to target things that we kind of really need to know to help us manage that land in a better way for our historic environment and archaeology. So, and as a few other people have pointed out in the questions in the comments, it is difficult to work with archaeology and assets and buried landscapes, as well as our ecology concerns, as well as our ambitions for climate change, as well as our tenanted farmland and agricultural practices. We have to find a sort of sweet spot that is working towards our bigger shared ambitions, and it is a real challenge for the trust. And someone, I can't remember who it was, but someone said at property level, often archaeology is kind of considered the poor cousin of some of the conservation work, and I think a lot of our archaeologists would agree with that. But we have to weigh up those decisions between, if you put a hole through here and you damage archaeology, but what you're going to be doing for our climate change ambitions and climate and managing the land better for our ecology and environment, that actually that sort of outweighs the minimal damage that will cause, and will obviously mitigate as best as we can, so that we don't do maximum damage to our places. But in terms of getting involved, for us, there's the Heart Heritage and Archaeology Ranger Team, which is a volunteering program, and you can inquire through the Heritage Records Online page or at your local property, and they can signpost you to someone. There may or may not be a group active in your area, but I would start with your local properties. We unfortunately don't really run any graduate traineeships at the moment around archaeology. We do have some apprenticeships around rangers who work very, very closely with our archaeologists, and some of the gardening teams. But I would also, for people who are interested in the conservation and curatorial side of things, encourage you to contact your sort of mansion and house properties, which will have teams, possibly internal teams, that can signpost you to maybe volunteering roles in particular. But Neil specifically asked around a 13-year-old who wants to become an archaeologist, preferably in the Northwest. So the CBA run the Young Archaeology Club, which is an essential way for young people to engage with archaeology. So Neil, do you want to say a bit more about those opportunities?
Yeah. So obviously YACS, the Young Archaeologists Club, is for 8 to 16-year-olds. There are about 80 branches across the UK. They offer up to in the region of 2,000 opportunities for young people to get involved in archaeology. I think the first thing to help everyone with is you don't actually immediately start digging when you're an archaeologist. There's lots of other things you can actually do. And for me, the most important thing about being an archaeologist is the questions we want to ask and how do you think about the questions. So I actually really love what Martin was actually talking about. It's taken him a lifetime of asking questions of places. You get the questions right, you get hooked, and I can tell you now, unfortunately, you'll never get an answer. You'll just get lots more questions, and that's really the power of archaeology. So again, yeah, Young Archaeologists Club is absolutely brilliant. If you go onto the CBA website, we do have a whole page that's dedicated to actually opportunities to getting involved in archaeology. We run the Festival of Archaeology every year. Again, really great showcasing of where archaeology is going. We have over 200 archaeological groups and societies that are members of the CBA that again offer opportunities for people to get involved. So again, it's just looking at what that network is and how you actually might want to ask questions about that. But again, really, it's, anyone can be curious. And for me, archaeology is fundamentally about curiosity and just going out and looking at things. Find something that piques your interest. It could be a drain cover. It could be a name on a brick that leads to a conversation about what something is. It can be a stone in the ground. Allow yourself just be led by that story, and you'll suddenly find that you're doing the stuff that archaeologists do. And so, yeah, you become an archaeologist.
Brilliant. Thank you, Neil. The other thing that I popped in the Q&A, which I can't tell if everyone can see it, but the other opportunities that I would look at. So CBA also have regional groups as well who might be tapped into amateur societies and groups who we often work with in the National Trust. So there might be, for example, I'm up in the east of England and we have Jigsaw, which connects all of our community archaeology groups and amateur groups together. So there are opportunities on the Jigsaw website for anyone who's in East Anglia. But the CBA sort of local groups, regional groups will also know some of those volunteer organisations that can help you with opportunities for field walking and test pitting, and a lot of them work on National Trust properties. And the other thing I would say is do look at commercial units. So some of the big national units, so Oxford Archaeology, Cotswolds Archaeology, Mola Headland, who I believe are still doing some of the infrastructure work. If you contact them, a lot of them now offer graduate or traineeship positions for 16 and above. Not all of them do, but there will be opportunities through the commercial sector, and that can get you involved in fines processing, fines washing, survey techniques, geomatics, as well as the excavation side of things as well. So definitely try to look up some of your commercial units that are local to you, or some of the big national ones. We are pushing for 8:35. I would remind everyone that we are going to put a poll up. I'm just going to quick last check of any significant questions. I think I've answered or directed most of them.
There's one question I think you've missed that you've got to absolutely ask, which is, if there was one site each of you was to dig at the National Trust, no holes barred, you're allowed to go anywhere, what site?
Money's no object.
Name the site you really want to go.
All right. Who looks ready for this? James, go.
I'd like to excavate one of the flint mines at Sisbury, Neolithic flint mines. And also, the money's no object, almost like a Grimes Graves, make one of those accessible for people to go down and visit. But yeah, to reopen a flint mine after 50 years since the last excavation would be an amazing opportunity.
Amazing. Vivi, any thoughts?
Potbury Hill Fort on the Shropshire Hills.
Yeah. What, the whole site?
Can I?
The whole hill fort.
No, just a decent amount.
That's a good one. Martin, what about Martin's like, well, he's done his mic drop moment of finding Stourton Castle. So what else would you do?
Oh, it's hard though, so much to choose from, isn't there?
I know.
I think Hambledon Hill is the one I never did. I think no one's ever really dug the Iron Age part of that properly. And I want to compare it with Hod Hill.
Yeah.
Both lovely places. Go to them. They're wonderful places, but it'll be someone beyond me who'll do that.
All right. And Neil, what about you? If you could dig anything, anywhere?
Oh, I didn't think you'd throw that one back at me.
Yeah, well.
I don't know. I'd like to do something industrial. I find them really fascinating. I'm not really, I don't really care where. I just like the roughness of some of the industrial stuff that we can actually look at. Especially when you get to find the people who actually worked in those places. I think that there's a closeness to the reality of living that I think makes me find it really. I mean, I love the fact that they've all presented on amazing garden sites and they've all chosen prehistoric sites to actually go and excavate, which says everything about the conversations that you have in the trust, which is brilliant. We should let you dig more prehistoric stuff.
Well, I think James.
Can I change my answer?
Yeah.
I want a juicy military site.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm a bit nerd for military archaeology, so I changed my choice.
We've got plenty of those as well, though, Vivi. So
I'll come and visit you. I would definitely also recommend everybody to keep an eye for the events during the Festival of Archaeology, because we might have some very exciting opportunities. I noticed a lot of comments on parents asking about their children, so do keep an eye on the amazing opportunities during the Festival of Archaeology for sure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you, Vivi.
To jump on the back of that, Shannon, sorry, I'd really recommend, alongside the CBA social media accounts, that if people have a look for National Trust Archaeology on Facebook, Instagram, and X, you'll find out a whole range more of all the various sites that some of our colleagues work on across the country, and some of those questions you've kind of asked today might be answered in some of those as well.
Yeah, and it's really, that's a really, really good shout, actually, James, because the amount of work that these guys do and the range of things that they do at any one time is really quite phenomenal. So this is the detail in these 3 particular sites, and the amount of work that's gone into them is huge, but actually it's a drop in the ocean compared to some of the stuff that they're working on. So really, really good shouts. That was amazing. Nobody asked me where I would dig, by the way.
Oh, Shannon, what would you like to dig?
Wicken Fen, thank you.
Oh, there you are.
The whole Mesolithic landscape, thank you. I'd be digging. But I can't, and I won't. Excellent. No, that was really helpful. So I'm going to ask our little tech people in the background to pop up the poll. So people who are still here, if you could answer the 3 questions, that would be really, really helpful. And I hand over to Neil for his last closing comments.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Shannon. That was fantastic. Thank you all so much for your amazing presentations. If I had one takeaway, it's just the sheer scale of earth movement that happened in those designed landscapes without mechanical diggers. The way things get hidden is just extraordinary, the sheer volume of material moving around, but really inspiring as ever. And we're absolutely delighted with our partnership with the National Trust, and just always you coming forward to talk to us. It's really brilliant. So thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Viviana. Thank you, James. Thank you, Martin. Absolutely brilliant. And we are looking forward to all that you're going to do in the Festival of Archaeology this year. It will be running from the 13th of July for 2 weeks, and I am delighted to say that our closing day of the Festival of Archaeology will be at a National Trust property, Ankerwycke Hall. So hopefully we'll be seeing some of you there, which is fantastic. Just to really finish off now, if you've enjoyed tonight's lecture, please do think about donating to ourselves or to the National Trust. A lot of what we actually do is done through donations, and your support is really essential. Not least something like the Young Archaeologists Club. £50 provides an opportunity for a young person to engage in archaeology for a whole year. So actually we can make that money go really far, and they are really important. There are so many people who've got into archaeology doing that and have learnt lifelong skills because of that. So we'll put a link into the chat about how you can go, certainly to the CBA donations page. And again, head over to the National Trust. They've got so much material that you can engage in. Now, the next opportunity for you to listen to some amazing archaeologists is actually in a couple of weeks' time, when we host our next This is Archaeology lecture. It's going to be presented by Lawrence Shaw, who is the lead historic environment advisor at Forestry England. So you saw some amazing trees and roots in the presentations tonight. In 2 weeks, you're going to have a tree fest for you. Lawrence is going to be talking about rooted in history, branching into the future. the story of the nation's forests with Lawrence. And I can actually tell you the story of how Forestry England and the Forestry Commission comes about. It's a fascinating story in its own right. And there is the archaeology of the early plantations to actually show it, where the actual people who went and planted those trees are. So that's going to be fascinating. That's going to be on Thursday, the 21st of March. Head over to the CBA website. You'll be able to find the links to actually join in on that. So we have lots more activities going on throughout the year, as do the National Trust. We will be back again to host these amazing archaeologists, because their stories are absolutely fantastic. And they are really brilliant people. So Shannon and your team, thank you so much. To everyone else, thank you for joining us. Thank you for all your amazing questions, all of the material in the chat, all of the names of what a hive of archaeologists actually becomes. Really great to have you all involved. Again, thank you very much. The webinar comes to a very abrupt end once we say goodbye. So again, thank you, good night, and see you next time.